G'day, ladies and gentlemen. Uncle Leon, how you going, mate?
Bloody lovely, mate. Feeling fresh and recuperated after a nice Easter break. I've done very little except eat and hang around playing guitars and play with the cat. What about you, mate? You went away?
I did, yeah. So, firstly, apologies for the one person that complained about the lack of episode last week. I was down south in the Ferguson Valley, farm stay with the family. So, no recording, no gear talk for us.
Heaven on earth. For anyone unfamiliar with southwestern Western Australia, it's essentially like, it looks like Ireland, like, rolling green hills, but it's kind of got the climate where you can have vineyards and all sorts of really, really nice things. So, yeah, it's kind of a little paradise on earth. Don't tell anyone about it because we like it that way.
I'll bleep all this out.
Yep, perfect.
But yeah, we were down south for a couple of days and now we're back. And so once again, apologies for the lack of episode, but we'll never do it again, promise. Won't ever break anybody's heart.
From now on, it's just going to be a consistent weekly grind.
You know what? I did remember, Leon, I wanted to follow up about something from the last episode we did, because we talked about the Nuno amp, if you will remember.
Yeah, I'm very curious to pick this thread up.
Well, I had a little chat to our friend Chris Gibbs on Monday.
Awesome.
The day before I left.
Shout out to Chris.
The day before, the day I left, but the day before we should have recorded an episode had I not been so selfish. But I said to him, hey, Chris, tell me about these King amps because I'm curious, and is there anything you can tell me? He said, I can tell you everything. I was there. I was like, okay.
He was there. He saw it all happen.
So there's a few things that, to be honest, it's been a week and my memory is not what it used to be. Mostly backed up everything that we discussed last week. So modded Ashtons. I think he said it was the Viper, the Ashton Viper amp. One thing he did say that I thought was really interesting is that the Ashton stuff and the Randall stuff was all coming out of the same factory.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that is possibly how something interesting happened there. But I guess at the same time, like Washburn and Randall are the same company too, right? I think so. I'm pretty sure they're like in the same, because you had like your dime bags with the...
That actually makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's all under the same umbrella. Look, if someone else wants to correct me on that, that's fine. But there was a little bit of, discussion there, but originally that was what all these King amps were. They were just modded Ashton amps. I think I mentioned it in the last episode, but Nuno stopped using them because of reliability issues.
Interesting.
Right, so he only toured with them for like a little while, and then they got I wouldn't say put in the bin, but he just sort of stopped endorsing them as much. Chris actually said something similar. So he had a couple of them. He had like a head, and he also had a combo, and he was working at Joondalup Music at the time, so he had access to all these amps. But he was saying he gigged with it for a while, but that it just like they were so hot rodded. Like these amps were like ultra hot rodded to make them sound the way they sounded, that they were just so unreliable and they were always going to be fixed. So that's a part of the lineage of these amps.
It's a bit like buying a sports car and you constantly have it in the shop because it's a sports car and it's pushing the limits.
Exactly. So, by all accounts, they sounded really good, but the reliability issues just didn't really make them viable at any point. Like, I mean, Chris was doing a million gigs in Perth every week at the time. Nuno's touring the world. I mean, there's different extremes of that. If you're playing in your bedroom, maybe that's a different story altogether. But,
people who are actually working.
Yeah, but I mean, like the Ashton amps, like they were inexpensive as they were. They weren't built with the highest quality components. So no doubt they're going to have, if you're pushing them hard, either through the circuit that you're modding to get them to sound that way, or just through playing them loud all the time, they're just not going to hold up, and that's true. So Chris said after a period of time, the two amps he had ended up going back to the shop, and I guess they got sold or resold or cannibalized into other amps. He doesn't have them anymore. But I mean that was probably about 10-ish years ago, and
so it's a really curious piece of amp history, but also, again, for the fact that it's Perth as well. These little stories that kind of percolate in and out, and just the number of people doing cool stuff, one way or another, and trying things, and constantly. I often listen to all the other stuff that I listen to and watch. It really seems like no, there was like 3 people and they all lived in LA, and they're the people who knew how to tinker with amps. But in reality, people are doing this all around the world.
Yeah. People have got their own ideas. I mean, there's electronics gurus in Perth that, I'll shout out John Galbraith, who taught me electronics. Although, I mean, to be fair, I didn't pay that much attention, but he taught me enough where I can get by.
He taught you everything you know, but not everything he knows.
Yeah, he probably taught me like 0.5% of what he knows.
Yeah.
And then I forgot most of that anyway. But it's like you give him anything with electricity in it, and he understands how it works and can fix something. Like, I mean, a quick story is I remember going back probably 15 years ago, my friend had a Marshall AVT and it blew up. And he took the amp to one of the local amp techs in Perth to say, like, look, my amp's broken, I need to get it replaced. The guy said, cool, no worries. $300 to open it up. And then I think he said it's going to be, and it costing you $300, $400, $500 to fix this amp. And my friend was like, man,
an AVT.
AVT head, like 150 watt head. It's like, well, what's the point buying a new amp, So anyway, we ended up taking it to John, and I had to drive my friend. He didn't have a driver's license. So
this friend was not me.
No,
by the
different.
Because you did have to do a lot of driving of me back in the day.
Yeah, but you've paid that back and then some, Uncle Leon. So you're off the hook now. But I took my friend with his amp to John's shop and said, look, he said, amp's not working. Do you reckon you can take a look at it, because I've been quoted all this money to fix it? And John opened it up and he looks inside it, gets a multimeter out. Yep, that resistor's gone. Here's another one, solder on top, and you're done. It's like, wait, what? He said, yeah, that resistor there is not working. It took John 3 minutes. It's not working. Solder on top. So wait, you mean just take the old resistor out? No, just leave the one that's there. It's very easy. Just pop it down. I just can't be. I don't want to do it. Like, that was his thing. Yeah. I don't want to have to do this, but that's how you do it to fix it. See you later. And sure enough, the amp worked. And I mean, I haven't seen my friend for a little while, so presumably the amp's probably still working, or maybe it's got other problems. But it's
that's
just like
that's the thing I've seen my dad do a lot in the past with, people bring around these guitars that are apparently broken, and similar thing. Oh, I got quoted $250 to do this. And, he kind of disappears into his cave of wonders, and he comes out with some Soviet spec bushing and goes, no, it's this particular model, this thing. What you want to do is you want to take this, then you want to basically you go and do the work, but you put this thing where I tell you to put it, and it will fix it. Yep. And so many times that's worked. Or, someone's come in and they've been like, oh, my guitar needs, a refret or something like that. And he'll look at it and go like, no, mate, do this. See that there? See that truss rod cover? Yeah, you're going to pull that off. And see this tool that's already in your guitar bag? Yeah, you're gonna twist that thing an eighth of a turn, and now play it, and that fret buzz, it's gone. Yeah, congratulations, you're a genius. I'm that kind of feels like those sort of people are really a dying breed.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, there's an entire industry of amp techs and all that is required, and I don't want to shit on that industry by saying, oh, this guy overcharged to fix one resistor, because unfortunately it takes like a significant amount of time and energy to get to the point when you can do any of this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
and even if you're constantly having to churn through not just people's amps, but like PAs and all the other electronic things that then your time is valuable. So to even diagnose something, of course it's going to cost money.
Yeah, it just so happens like we knew someone that was good enough and had a spare 5 minutes to crack it open. Not everybody has that luxury. So, But I mean, that's for you and I, man, that's what we're very lucky. We know a lot of people. It's how we have access to so much gear and have for so long as well. It's
Be nice to people, ladies and gentlemen. It pays off in the long run.
Absolutely. So I think that's... Oh, I was going to tell you, mate, is so I just bought this finally... I found, not finally, I didn't try that hard, but I got a Celestion G12H 70th anniversary.
Oh, that's right. I think you did mention that. Have you got it?
Yeah, I have it. It was in my car. It's now in my amp.
Yes.
So I haven't. I'd finished it when you texted me like, oh, what time do you want to do this podcast? I was screwing the thing in, so I haven't even fired the amp up. But it's in the amp now. I paid $100 for it, $100 Australian, which is pretty good. Picked it up in Morley, just around the corner. So that I'm really curious to hear what it sounds like. The guy I bought it off, said it sounded kind of thin, and in his estimation, it may actually be broken. But he
Interesting.
said the tech that replaced it, because I think he had he didn't say what he replaced it with, but I think he said it came out of an orange what is it, TH30 maybe?
Yep.
So I don't know what that, it's like a combo. I don't know what the cabinet looks like. I'm not sure if there was another problem down the track, but I'll fire it up and hear what it sounds like anyway. But here's a funny story for you, Uncle Leon. So it's in my pink cab, which I refer to as Pinky. It's probably in that photo that I put up on Instagram a few weeks ago. I'm looking at it right now. So
you should call the green one Brain.
That's actually pretty clever. Better than calling it Greenie, which I have been calling it. Yeah, okay, exactly. I'll call it Brain from now on.
Pinky in the Brain.
So I put that cab together like 6 months ago, and I had in there your two warehouse speakers. So the Green Beret in the top left, and then the Reaper in the top right, and then in the bottom left, G12. The T75 that came out of a JCM 800 cab, and then in the bottom right was a greenback that came out of I call it the Rossetti cab. It's just a 4x12 greenback from early 2000s-ish, which sounds really good. It was the best sounding speaker in that. Or so I thought, Leon. Because as it turns out, when I opened up the cabinet, where the Green Beret is supposed to be is just another greenback, which is fine, but I have no idea where your Green Beret is. Like, it's at the studio somewhere, but
it's in the complex.
Yeah, I don't know what cabinet it's in. Like, it literally could be in a number of places. I'm looking at the green cab because it doesn't have the grill in the front, and I can tell what speaker's what. And the greenbacks have a much smaller dust cap, so it's definitely not in that cab because the T75s that I know are in that cab have much bigger dust caps. So where the fuck is this speaker? It may be in your 4x12 that's downstairs in Revolver still, possibly, because that's where I had pinched it out of. I definitely remember taking it out.
These are, I think part of the fun of all these projects is, as much as you assemble things, you also kind of semi-lose things for a while, and then it's like you're back on the hunt.
Yeah, I really want that cab to be like the two warehouses and then the two Celestians, though, so I'm kind of bummed. And I couldn't find my electric drill this morning, so I had to use a manual screwdriver like an idiot.
Yeah, that's a bit tricky, isn't it?
So I'll find the screwdriver, I'll find the speaker, stick him in there, and then we'll hear what it sounds like. But I mean, to be fair, I've been telling people it's a greenback. I've been miking it for the last few months and recording with it quite a bit. And in my brain, it's been like just a greenback anyway, but it's, kind of not.
Yeah.
But it has, as it turns out, just been a normal greenback.
Wow, they really, really nailed this greenback tone with this greenback knockoff.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, it's a bummer because it's not the best. Theoretically, they're not the best sounding greenback in that cabinet as well. The bottom right one is. So anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm still going to fire it up. I'll have a listen to that speaker today once we finish up here, and then see how she goes. And I will say actually just quickly, the reason before you segue into the topics of today, the reason I got on this whole speaker train like a few months ago was because of the Splawn Nitro, which I mentioned a few times. It's just like, it sounds so horrendous. Like so horrendous with V30s, in my opinion. But as soon as you chuck it through a greenback or something like that, it sounds like $1 million. And
fascinating. It's
come up in a few other videos, like watching some other videos of I watched this Fryette thing the other day with him and Joe Barisi talking about the Fanes.
That was such a great video.
Yeah, that was wicked. Hey,
I really, really enjoyed that. I'd watched an entire documentary series of just Steve going to people's studios.
Yeah. Well, I think they did a podcast episode, which is 2 hours long. I'll listen to that at some point. But my point was they matching the amp that you've got there with the speaker it's designed to work with is probably a lot more important to consider with, with getting guitar sounds in the studio or live or whatever. I mean, they talk about it with the high watts and stuff. For me, it was the Splawn. I had to go on the Splawn. I'll make it sound like it was really hard. I went on the Splawn website. What does he sell in his cabinets? And as it turns out, it was you order them with greenbacks or you order them with G12Hs. And it's like, oh, well, there you go. That's why I wanted to try these.
So here's the thing. If you're designing an amp around a particular cabinet, you're locked into the impedance that cabinet is providing to the amp as well. And, you know, speaker cabinets and different speakers have wildly different like impedance characteristics. This is one thing which Fractal does in the Axe FX, which I think is actually, I know like Line 6 and the Helix, they have like impedance curves, but they're built in, but you can change them in the Fractal and modify them. And it is such a, you know, it's not like a primary factor, but it's probably one of those things where it's like a secondary factor in the feel and the tone of
that's what I was going to say.
You're getting.
It's not an EQ curve thing, right? It's the way when you're digging in and whatever. It's
Yeah,
just like
it's
the way,
dynamic.
Yeah, dynamic.
It's dynamic.
Yeah.
So, but it does really change the character of the amplifiers. So something like the Spawn, which has a buttload of low end in it, like, you know, and low mids, and that's like one thing that changes massively. And then even if you like different load boxes, you know, like the 2 Notes load boxes and the Universal Audio aux, they don't look like a proper speaker impedance at all. They're this kind of inverse bell curve shape.
Right.
And if you look at a greenback, you know, it's got a very particular impedance curve, or like a Mesa cabinet with V30s has a very, very different looking, you know, like the oversized straight ones. They have this like resonant frequency around like 70-ish hertz versus, I don't know, something like an Orange cab, which has a much higher kind of low resonant frequency, almost it's like 120, 130 hertz. So big difference in the way you like perceive low end, and, you know, if you're playing palm mutes and stuff like that. So I reckon that might have to do with the Spawn as well, as like the V30 cab impedance not playing nice with it. But that's a whole other rabbit hole as well. But it is super interesting.
It's really interesting,
if you're designing the amp around it, you'll tune it to that particular cabinet and that particular speaker. And yeah.
Well, man, I'd really like to talk to Jason, if we can get him on for a chat at some point about like that side of things. It's just like I remember looking at the extra menus in the Fractal, like trying to dial in amps, and I'm like, I don't know what any of this stuff does. And it's so like overwhelming. It can be so overwhelming because outside of bass, middle, treble presence, like what does this stuff mean? And you understand it now. I have a semi grasp on it from.
Well, look, I don't understand it. Cliff understands it, and he puts it there for users to mess around with, and I just kind of mess around with it and figure out the like parts of it that I like. So,
yeah, but in terms of like having like a massive rack of amps like I have, or you know, even talking about the synergy stuff. That's the one part that is really confusing to me. If I think about like how everything is supposed to work in a specific ecosystem, is like, you know, okay, there's the amp side, there's the head side, but the speaker side, it's just more than a one thing. It's more than just a frequency response, you know? It's and then obviously, as you said, the cabinet or the speaker impedance or all these things or the environment that it's in. It's like, man, I wouldn't say it's like harder, but it's like, it's so overlooked. I think it's more than like your guitar pedals, you know, it's the physical movement of air and all this stuff. It's just, it gets really confusing. And I think for me, where I'm really getting obsessed at the moment is like just understanding all these factors and how they contribute to a guitar sound. Spending a lot of time and energy and money to buy the cabinets and the speakers and stuff to understand it. But
put your money where your mouth is.
I don't know. Maybe I'll sort of work something out sometime. But speaking of synergy, Uncle Leon.
Bada boom. We couldn't talk about this the other week because it wasn't out yet. But I've been super excited for it because it's super good.
And here it is 1 week later. Breaking news.
1 week later. Breaking news. Hopefully people have watched the video on my channel and a bunch of other channels, because that's how video embargoes work. But yeah, Synergy have a 6505 module with PV, and it sounds amazing. When I found out about that and when they sent me one, it was one of those things where I kind of just plugged it in and, you know, I didn't really touch anything on it. I just like slotted it in and fired it up and then played guitar for half an hour, just loving the sound of it. Mm-hmm. Thinking in my head, you know, my preconceptions being, 6505, like you got to boost them because everybody boosts them, and you need V30s and all this kind of stuff because that's the vibe. But yeah, just with like greenbacks and a guitar, you know, guitar straight into module, into power amp, into cab, it's awesome. It was the easiest demo video to do as well, because it just sounds like, it kind of sounds the way a 5150 6505 has always sounded in my head. But I've never really been able to get out of a head when I've tried one.
Right.
And, I had that 6505 1x12 combo as my touring amp for years as well. And it didn't really different speakers and a little
Open
cabinet.
back cab as well?
Yeah, semi-open back cab. That thing was a godsend. I remember,
yeah.
You remember well, though, going to Guitar Center, Oklahoma City, and suffering through me trying every single amp in there.
We were there for so long, man. We were there for 4 hours or something. It was ridiculous.
And going, Leon, you should try this PV because it'll probably just work. And then I tried it and I was like, yeah, you're right.
Well, because before that, this is 2012, we were doing all the gigs together where you were using a Blues Junior and an
two tube screamers.
Yeah. Oh, no, an OCD, remember? So it was kind of like, did you have the Ragdoll pedal, the Johnny C Ragdoll pedal at that point?
I did, yeah. There was definitely a period. No, there was definitely a period where I feel like I actually bought the OCD in America and bought it back. I feel like those Bar Orient gigs we were doing, I was like, I just remember a period where I had 2 tube screamers, and that was like tube screamer always on into the Blues Junior with like a Telly or that P90 Hamer. And then I'd use the other tube screamer for more gain, but then probably definitely OCD at some point.
You're forgetting the Boss ME50.
Oh yeah, that thing.
That was more. I thought that was more influential in the tone than anything else. Like maybe I don't actually remember the tube screamers, but you're probably right.
I think maybe the tube screamers came a little later, where I was using that for when I was playing with Ryan and Cam, and we were doing little gigs with the Blues Junior. And maybe I did one gig with 2 tube screamers, and it's just how I choose to remember the past.
Yep.
So funny. Anyway, what was I on about?
We
tried every amp.
Yeah, 6505. Do you remember what speaker was in that? Was that the Sheffield thing?
Must have been. But I used that amp so much.
I think really
I did. Good. I worked it out at one stage. I did probably about 40 gigs on it in America, and it just getting no regard, thrown in and out of the car, all the dust and dirt that got into it. We did a gig. So this is funny, right? We did a gig at this place called the Booby Trap in Topeka, which was like, they did gigs on a Tuesday night. So it was always, you could do this was in 2013, where we were like booking gigs on the fly. You could do your Friday, Saturday, Sunday shows in like a kind of bigger city, and then on your way through to, wherever you were going, we did a bunch of shows in like Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas. That was kind of the big loop. So we did like 3 or 4 big loops, and each time on one loop, you'd be like, on the Tuesday, we'll go to Topeka, Kansas, and we'll do the Booby Trap. It was a fun gig. And I think what happened there one night was we'd done it a few times, and the guy running the bar, who was also the sound guy, I remember him going, there's a DI out on this. I'll just use that instead of miking it. And there was a ground lift on it. And I think he lifted the ground and just didn't mention anything. And then the next couple of gigs, this amp, like every couple of songs would just go like, it was the worst noises, man. I was like, this thing's a bit cooked. And, got through a few more gigs with it, and just being like, I got to fix this, which often was me just turning around and like kicking the amp as hard as I could. Mm-hmm. And that would fix it for a few songs. Man, that poor amp. Anyway, we were in Vegas, and Rossetti, friend of the podcast, Nick Rossetti,
previous owner of my Greenbacks cab.
Yeah, he was there with EC, and they were at one of the shows, and the amp started doing the thing, and he runs up to me. He's like, bro, the ground lift. I was like, what are you talking about? It's like, there's a button on the back, press it. It shouldn't be in. And this is from Nick, who famously
literally knows nothing.
He'll tell you, he's like, I don't know how anything works. I just look up what people I like use. And, this was the first gig we did. He's like, bro, I normally color code all my cables. I've got new cables. What do I do? So I helped him plug his rig in, and then he just color coded everything, and he was sweet. So I was like, are you sure, Nick? Like normally you're the first person to tell me you don't know what's going on. Sure enough, it was the ground lift switch. So a couple of days later, I went to Guitar Center in Ventura, and I traded that amp in for, what did I trade it in for? I feel like I paid $400 for it, and I traded it in for maybe $300.
Yeah, I remember it was $400. I remember.
I worked out it cost me about $2.50 a gig to use that amp, which is pretty awesome. I'll pay that. I'll pay that any day of the week. So,
Yep.
And then the next year I came back and I bought another one. So I did even more gigs with that. And I traded that one in 2019 when I was back in the States for a Fishman triple play pickup.
Oh, yeah, right.
Because it was just sitting at my in-laws' place, taking up space. And I was like, look, I'm going to get rid of this amp. And I actually I remember we played with more than one band where the guitar players had taken those combos and converted them into heads. It was sort of like, yeah, you can pick one of these up secondhand for $300-$400 and just smack it into a head shell, and you basically got a 6505.
Are they still 100 watt, or are they like 60s or 120 watts?
I feel like the combo might have been maybe 60 watts.
Yeah, I feel like
I've got to look it up.
It'd have to be 60, surely.
The 6505 112 plus. That thing saved my life on 60 watts. There you go.
There you go.
I'm so like, I almost, I'm not going to buy one, but I almost want to get one here just to have, for the fact that it's like, that thing was.
They are more expensive here than you would expect. I've seen them come up before for like maybe 1,200 Australian, which is just too much.
Which ain't going to happen.
Do you remember
1,200 Australian dollars. I'm looking at one right now. So that's my experience with that type of amp.
I got two more stories actually about that, because about that amp and you and I in the studio. So firstly, because there's two. I don't know if you remember both of them, but number one,
I think I do.
A friend of ours, Mike Lyon. So we did an EP with him a couple of years ago. That was around 2014, which you played all the guitars on.
Yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah, and he had the 65. Is it 3.4? Is that what it was called? The EL34 version.
There's the what's it called? The 30 something.
It's a 34, whatever the 34 EL34 version is of the 6505 combo. That's what he had.
The 3120.
Maybe that's what it is. Anyway, whatever it was, that's what he had, and he really wanted to use. Even though you were playing guitar, he really wanted you to use his amp and his guitars when possible. He had a Jim Root Telly with EMGs in it, and he also had this amp. I remember not liking the Jim Root Telly that much, but the amp sounded pretty good. So anyway, plugged that in, did the same thing I always do, like unplug the main speaker and run it through the wall. And then within like maybe half of tracking one song, amp just blew up.
I do remember that well. It was kind of like, okay, it sounded good. And then the magical purple smoke.
Yep. And
filled the room.
So that was done. And I don't remember what we used after that. It would have been probably pre-Recto. I don't think you were using Rectos at that point.
I feel like we kind of used that EP as a bit of a trial run because I just got back from the States and I just got my single cut. So we were pretty keen to use that guitar.
Do you remember what amp was it though?
There was definitely some Tiny Terror happening on there.
Okay.
And
I wouldn't have had I might have had the Splawn at that point, but I don't remember using it.
Did you have your Marshall at that time?
I'd had the Marshall. Yeah, maybe we tried the Marshall.
I think it might have been Marshall. I remember using the Tiny Terror quite a lot on that and just being like, this is cool.
What about the Jet City? Would we have used that or the Soldano or anything?
Yeah, maybe. There was definitely, because you got your Marshall and we retracked 4 Ragdoll songs.
Oh, that's right.
And ended up releasing them in 2014.
That's right.
So you definitely had your Marshall. Anyway, long story short, we blew his amp up.
But then 2015, because I picked up my 5152 in that after getting back from America in 2015. I got that and a cabinet for really cheap, like $800 Australian. And then pretty much immediately sold the 4x12 because I just didn't think I really was going to use it at all. And then we went to use that because when there's a picture of us online actually of like it was end of 2015, getting ready to track that back to zero.
All the amps.
Yeah, there's probably like about 10, 12 amps in this one picture. And we went through every single one of them, did some due diligence. And I remember really liking the 5152.
Yeah, a lot. I remember tight drive into it was where the party was at.
And then that blew up after like one song. Or maybe even in the middle of tracking
I don't think we even got through tracking a whole song.
Yeah,
it was like, oh, really?
Cooked it. So then got that one fixed. And then I ended up using it for a few years later. I sold it recently because I picked up a 5150 script. So like the original one, not the block letter, the one that came just after that, from Cash Converters for like $700 or something, which is very, very cheap. 700
Deal of the
Australian.
year.
And then ended up flipping that out for a little bit more money. But the the other funny thing, Leon, if you'll remember, is also friends of the show, Chaos Divine, who, if you like your progressive heavy metal, go check them out.
100%. Great band.
We went through an even more exhaustive investigation.
That was one for the ages.
Yeah,
I don't think that's like, the Roman emperors would have been proud of the excess of that one.
Yeah, so they were recording the guitars for their last album here, and that was in 2018. So they had borrowed, or we had a total of 23 amps to go through to find what was going to work for this project, which is quite a lot. And I believe it was all plugged. Originally, it was all running through my Vintage 30 cab, and I had like 3 mics on it with like SM57, MD421, Royal 121, all the usual suspects. We went through one at a time, played some stuff. I didn't have a reamper at that point, so it was literally just like, oh, what do you like the sound of? And cranked them all up. And the winning amp was a 5153 100 watt that they'd borrowed.
That's right. I remember that sounding
It sounded
awesome.
really good. And I think they used a few other things over the course of tracking the album. Like that was the main one for all the rhythms, which at the moment is probably like metal standard. It's just like the sound of the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever, 10 years.
Yeah, I remember kind of, because they had a 50 watt version of that head that was like, it wasn't a lunchbox head, but it wasn't a full size
They
head.
still make that.
Yeah. And I remember maybe around 2015, 2016, being in the States and the shows we were doing, like everyone had one of those amps.
Yeah.
It was crazy. Like nearly every band we played with, like the guitar players had those amps and they sounded awesome.
Well, yeah. And actually with the Chaos Divine thing, I remember they had both those versions too, both in white, like a 100 watt version and a 50 watt version. But anyway, and before I get to the logical conclusion of this story, what happened was I thought, fuck it. Like I had my cruise control amp selector at the time. So it was, you could have one head in, but send it to multiple cabinets. So after doing a little bit of messing around with just the V30s, I threw up the Greenbacks cab, the Rossetti Greenback cab. And I think I just put a 57 on it. And it was 57 in a Roya. And I was like, oh, have a listen to this one as well, because we may as well hear what it sounds like. So here's the V30. That sounds really good. Here's the Greenbacks. Oh, that sounds really good. What does it sound like together? Bam, put them on. And it was just awesome. It was like such a great guitar sound. And I had it patched in on my SSL summing mixer, and I mentioned this the other week, but all these mics come into 5 different inputs on the summing mixer, and then it goes into 1 input in Pro Tools. So you have the sound committed basically with all the mics leveled out. But anyway, one thing I didn't do, and I sort of thought about this well after the fact, but I didn't actually change the impedance on the back of the amp, because it said splitting to 2, so you're halving the impedance. So I think it would have been set at 16 ohms, but in fact it was driving into 8 ohm loads, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 2 parallel outputs, so it'd be into. So anyway, they got through 7 or 8 songs, then blew up the 5150 100 watt version. So awesome. So that's 3.
I see a theme developing here.
Yeah, so 3 of these heads.
Well, okay, let's think about this, really.
Yeah.
There's the Mike Lyon explosion, there's the Chaos explosion, there's the Back to Zero explosion, and there's basically the one I pretty much wrecked. And
which one was that? Oh, yeah, that one.
The 112 combo, because it's a bit cooked.
Yeah.
But it worked in the store in Guitar Center when they tried it out. So apologies, Guitar Center Ventura, you bought a lemon.
Yeah. But you know what? Like, I mean, the sound of it is awesome, so that's fine. The amp, just to finish the last story, they ended up finishing a lot more tracking with the 50 watt version, which apparently sounded pretty much the same, but not 100%, but good enough. At least in the meantime that they were able to get the 100 watt fixed. So they got that fixed, swapped that back in. Who knows what song was recorded with what,
That's
but
cool.
Still awesome sounding amps. And yeah, actually, before we talk about, sorry, this has been a way long detour to talk about the signature module, but I think just one more thing. I reckon it was, again, maybe a Fryette video that I watched or podcast. They were talking about the someone, maybe using his gear back in the early 90s and loving the tone, but then all of a sudden just able to get their hands on the 5150s that had just come out. And I think it was the Fryette one. I think it was Fryette that was saying it, but he's like, yeah, look, the artist just decided to go with the 5150s because you look at the price tag, it was something like $2.5-3 for the Fryette and like $900 for the 5150. It just was made way more sense for everybody. So there's certainly like an element of the parts in them are not quite at the same. The sound is awesome, but perhaps they're not as robust. Maybe, I don't know.
I mean, it's a great example of, you know, the thing that is the best doesn't always become the thing that is the most widely used because of availability or just pure economics of it. You know, it's sort of look at classic Gibson guitars from the 50s, and the reason they were used so widely in the late 60s and early 70s is because they were discontinued and they were cheaper than what you know what I mean is like if you're Joe Walsh or Jimmy Page or someone like that, you kind of cotton on pretty quickly that like, oh yeah, they're the ones to look out for. Or, you know, you're Ingve when Marshall have bought out the master volume models and no one wants the non-master volume models, but you like the way they sound, so you buy them for peanuts and you end up becoming the dude with like 20 Marshall heads on stage. You know, I've read interviews with him where he's like, yeah, when like basically the 2203s came out, no one wanted the like the plexis. So everyone I would see, I'd buy them because they were so cheap. Like you couldn't give them away. And that kind of became my sound. So there's that element. The 5150 to me is like the best modern example of that because yeah, you're in a metal band and you're touring everywhere. You want something that you can just easily get your sound on and spend, you know, a third of the price from some kind of custom thing, or even just spec it. You know, it's like, oh yeah, we're playing a bunch of festivals. Have 5150s as backline amps. Every place that's providing amp hire and backline hire can go and buy a bunch of them and keep everyone happy. So
yeah, I'd like to spec a plexi with a Jose mod and like, yeah, cool, no worries. Yeah, I think, you know, like to piggyback on that idea, when was it? 2017 before I got my Fractal, because I really wanted an AX8 because you had one and it sounded awesome. But what stopped me was the fact that it was, you know, it was expensive, but the wait time on them was kind of hard. And meanwhile, I could go to any music store in Perth and pick up a Helix, you know? Yeah. So there was a period where I was like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother. The Helix unit is going to sound pretty much, I'll be able to do similar sort of stuff with it. And if it breaks, I'll toss it in the bin and go buy another one, or it's replaced. It's easy enough to be replaced, which obviously I went that route a lot later because I still ended up getting the AX8 and I've used it a shitload. But there is something to be said for that. Like, just give me the thing off the shelf and I'll 100%. Deal with it.
I mean, I reckon that's one of the, I think growing up for me, I used to be super neurotic about, you know, and this is a great example of like, I've done 0 gigs, but I have all these things that I know I'm going to want when I gig.
Yeah.
About, you know, like in Perth in winter, it gets cold enough where it's like a bit uncomfortable to play guitar sometimes. Mm-hmm. And being a teenager and being like, what am I going to do when I'm doing gigs and it's cold? Mm-hmm. I'm going to need some solution, you know, like I'm going to build up all these complex routines around this. Because I think I'd watched Queen live at Wembley and Brian May talks about the air being really cold and him having to tune his guitars all the time. And I was like, oh God, that sounds so bad. Not even thinking that, hey, guess what? There'd be dozens of techs running around on that stage and he'd have a guitar tech tuning his guitar. He's playing a stadium. He can afford it. So yeah, I remember being really neurotic about stuff like that. And then just having this kind of thing of like, no, what you should do is you should be resilient and you should know how to just play any guitar on like the most generic amp. Yep. So what's everywhere? Oh, a DSL. Yeah, DSLs just do that. Like, you know, just figure out how to get, you know, rather than worry about having the 100% A+ tone at every gig, which is never going to happen, just get used to having 70% of the ideal situation and just working with that. Just B- it, bro.
Yeah, like not bad advice. I think I wish I'd gone into gigging a lot more with that in mind as well.
Yeah.
And I've always chased I've always sort of chased something that I'm comfortable with, and I'm still sort of working it out. I think what I've come to the conclusion of, though, after all these years is if I'm stuck, I'll have lots and lots of gain, and I'll roll the gain back on the guitar.
Yeah.
And if I can do that, it's fine. I mean, there's the I think you remember
That's pretty
this.
good.
When I had my pedal board stolen out of my car like years ago, about 2015. I literally had nothing. I had to do these gigs, but all I had was my, at the time, Laney GH50 tube head, which sounds really good. Actually sold that to Chris, who asked a question about the Nuno amp. So hopefully he still got it, because if he doesn't, I'd probably buy it back off him. But I had that amp, and I had my orange 1x12 cab with the V30s in it.
Yep.
And I was using my Warmoth guitar quite a lot as well.
That's right.
And I ended up doing like just a bunch of gigs where it was guitar directly into the head, no tuner. Like I just would tune with my phone before I played.
What a lad.
Yeah, and I just went and did the gig, and it was fine. Like, the amp ended up not really being loud enough for a couple of the gigs I did, and it was like no sound guy, so you just deal with it. But it was fine, man. And you don't think about. I'm not really one to think about the tones that much as I'm like when I'm actually in the process of trying to play guitar, and I just need to like hear it and kind of have enough distortion and sustain to live with it. When I start complicating 100%. Stuff with too much pedals, it gets really weird. That's aside from the stupid pedal board I have at the moment for the cover gigs. It's a different sort of thing. But
yeah, you're across all of that though. I think for me it really helped as well having Ryan, because that was the like B- is good enough. Just play the gig and don't be crap. Attitude was really helpful to be around, because I mean, like he had a valve state combo that he'd taken the valve state head part out of, so it was a 2x12, and he'd sit a DSL 50 on top of that. And when we started gigging, I had a rack and a bunch of stuff, and he was like,
yeah, he did.
Oi, just do this, like just use this, trust me, it'll sound fine. And kind of having somebody who's way more experienced to just be like, oi, shut up, you actually don't know anything, like I've done this before, do this, really like transformed my attitude about doing gigs and being precious about gear. And now
Ryan doesn't care about gear at all, so much to the point he won't even bring a guitar lead to a gig.
Yeah, exactly. Just hey, at least he brings a guitar though.
But anyway, let's go back. I mean, I'm really sorry everyone listening. It's been such a detour. Let's talk about the Synergy module.
It's been more than a week since Troy and I have caught up. So anyway, the 5150 it's like the gold standard for high gain for numerous reasons. This module sounds like a really good 5150, just straight up. And you know what? It's almost easier to use because you just have 2 rows of knobs, and you can have both channels in the module as the lead or the crunch. Mm-hmm. And you just go and I saw Pete Thorne did the video where he compared the 6505 to the SLO module.
Oh yeah.
And I think the SLO and the Morgan modules are maybe the only modules I haven't tried. And I've been like, oh, I should get an SLO module. Hearing it side by side, I was like, whoa, I actually kind of dig the 6505. Mm-hmm. Like they're really, really similar, but the 6505 has that like angry fizz about it, which I really like.
One of the Facebook groups that I'm in, I think it's the Egnator MTS Synergy Facebook group, but there was a few people complaining about the 6505 because it's like, oh, well, what's the point? It's the same preamp section as the Soldano and the same as the Mesa Boogie, da-da-da. It's like, it's not quite true. Like, yeah, I guess they're kind of based on the same thing, but the amps don't sound the same. It's like there's more to it than just that little part. And I think the whole module is supposed to really be what the amp is in total, not just what the one preamp part is. You really
obviously they're trying to represent the sound of an amp, and it's not just like, we just pulled the circuit of a 6505 preamp out and rehouse it. It's like, it's not that easy. You got to make it work with the Synergy system and everything else. So yeah, it's pretty look, it's just, I mean, a lot of those modules almost kind of sound the same anyway. Like you can get there really quickly.
I mean, it's the same as like anything.
It's a different vibe.
When you've got like a modeler where it's like, do you want a fucking a JCM 800 or do you want a Cameron or do you want a, I don't know, like just pick a Browner? Like they all sound really awesome. It's just like a slightly different flavor of fucking distortion. Like, do you want Do you want vanilla ice cream? Do you want fucking salted caramel ice cream? Do you want caramel ice cream? Who cares? Like, it's not. Or maybe that's the wrong. Maybe we'll say chocolate or Belgian chocolate or choc chip ice cream or like.
Yeah, you know,
it's just
exactly.
They're all going to be probably pretty good, but at the end of the day, it's still fucking chocolate ice cream. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
exactly.
But you know what? Like, all two things. Let me ask you because I haven't tried the module yet. Firstly, because I don't remember on the faceplate, does it have the like a resonance and presence thing on it, or is it just so it's gain and EQ?
Yeah,
and volume, and then a switch.
Hang on, I don't have to lean over and take a look at the module, Troy. No, it is gain, 3-band EQ, volume per channel, and then a 2-way switch to select between crunch and lead modes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not like a 5150 aficionado because, like, you know, the one I have at the moment is awesome, but the presence knob has snapped off it. So the presence is always in whatever position that is. Yeah. And it just so happens to sound really awesome. So I don't feel like I'm losing too much. But, yeah, I mean, it's like if you can still dial in like that level of chunk with just the 3-band EQ, then that's awesome. And, you know, most of because on the Sin 2, that doesn't have presence, but it's just got the SAG control. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. But then you have modules that do have like a kind of like
Sin 50. Well, the Sin 50's got a presence and resonance, or just the presence
and depth.
Present depth. Okay, so you can sort of replicate it anyway.
Which work really, really nicely. So
on the Sin 30, it's only a presence, so you don't have the depth control. But like, you know, that's fine. So yeah, you can basically get most of the way there. Now, what was the other thing I was going to ask you? Ask you about that. Okay, because Peavey have sort of refreshed the 6505 line in like the last few months, if I'm correct.
Yeah, they've got their sort of like, what is it, the original 92 or something?
Yeah. So is that what it's called, like the 6505 1992 or?
Well, I know Kyle Bull has a demo with it because that's what I watched and I was like, this sounds sick.
Because I know there's a 6505 2 as well.
Correct. Yeah. Let's see. Let's go back through. He's done a demo with the 6505 module, which is cool. And
I haven't watched that yet. I'll check that out.
The Head First Alta, which was also very, very cool. Where is it? PV 6505 1992 original. That's what it's called.
Right. So is there documentation to say whether or not this module is like any of these new products that's been forced into this, not forced, but has been like made available for Synergy, or is it like taking the 6505? You know, I haven't heard that discussed at all, but I'm kind of interested because I haven't seen any. I haven't gone deep enough to be like, oh, here's some comparison videos of a 5150 original and 6505. So. Yeah,
John Brown's video, he basically has an original 5150 and the module with like a Sin. Can't remember if Sin 1 or a Sin 2, but he ABs between them, and it's pretty much spot on right there. So let's see. The Synergy engineering team spent over 2 years working with Peavey to perfectly capture the 6505 tone, feel, and response. This no compromise collaboration resulted in an all-tube preamp module that genuinely replicates and streamlines everything that makes the 6505 so popular. So yeah, they kind of don't really say too much about it.
I mean, to be fair, like the 6505 and the 5152 and the 6505 in theory are the same amp. And there's plenty of videos of people comparing all these things too. The Matt Heafy one, that's the guy from Trivium, right? Matt Heafy? Yep. He does one with, I think, like 5150, a 5152, 5153, and maybe like a 6505. I think that's what it is. Lines them all up. Or maybe it's two of the EVH versions. I can't remember. But there's like a tiny difference, but they don't sound that different from one another. The 5153 has a slightly different character, I think, if you compare them all together. It's maybe a little more modern, even though I don't really... That's kind of like the new warm. It's like saying something's warm. So it sounds modern. But
it's just funny as well that it's like, you know, we haven't even mentioned the like, this is Eddie Van Halen's signature amp, you know? And like everything you read about Eddie Van Halen on the internet is plexi, you know, oh my God, Eddie, goat, plexi. I mean, how long was he not playing his old Marshall for? Like probably longer than he actually played it. It was one of those like Steve Moore did more gigs with Deep Purple than Richie Blackmore, but you know.
That's like, I've never thought about that before. That's funny.
Like So who's the true, but, he didn't play in Rock and Machine Head, so no one cares.
Yeah, but neither of them played on Come Taste the Band, which is...
Yeah, exactly. Tommy Bolin.
Yep, one of my
patron
favorites.
saint of the channel.
Yep. So, I mean, I looked at the 6505 to get back on, my interest in this module, because I obviously would love to hear it. I don't know if I need to go out and buy one immediately because I have the 5150 there. However, if I end up somehow being able to afford a bunch of Synth, this is my dream, right? Is to have a bunch of Synth 2s and Soldano module in there, and the Bogner stuff and whatnot. It would be nice to pull the 5150 out of the rack, the head rack, because it's in there. My rack of heads. So I've got the dual rector, I've got the 5150, I've got the stiletto. Which the stiletto, man, it's just so good. Like, it's so underrated. Splawn Nitro, and then the Marshall JMP. So it's like those are the main 5 amps, like heads that I like.
I was chatting to I've got all these boutique pedals here that Murray lent me. So, he's friends with Trev, who runs the gas station.
Oh, yep.
And he was telling me about, there's a pedal in there by, Kingsley. They do all the preamp pedal kind of thing. So there's I think it might be the Page in there. I need to do a demo with it. It's pretty cool. He was kind of saying how Trev really likes it in like the effects loop off his gigging amp, which is a stiletto.
Well, there you go. It's
people in the know, mate.
I need to do a gig with it. I've only used it for sessions, and it happened weeks ago. I think I mentioned it. Like, it beat the JMP, like the OG. It has a thing that is just, it's kind of, I don't know. It's versatile. It's really good. Anyway, my point was like, if I could pull the 5150 out, so I could put another nice amp in there, maybe that would be awesome. And then I've just got my rack of high gain shit with the synergy stuff. So that's something to work towards when I get a little bit of time. But
yeah, well, I'll bring this module around ASAP, and you can try it with your rig. I'll be really curious to know how it goes, like side by side with the real thing.
Yeah. I said, man, I'm really keen to hear it. I'm really keen to hear all the synergy stuff. Like, I'm fully drinking of the Kool-Aid, shall we say?
Yeah, exactly. No, it is. It was just what I found consistently with their stuff. That, well, I should say, what I've found is that the things that I like in the system, I really, really like. And the stuff that I haven't, like, I didn't love the BE and HBE modules, like, which really surprised me. I thought they would be the ones I'd be all about. And then I played a real BE, and I was like, this is cool, but it's like exactly the same reason I didn't like the, say, HBE module as much as I like the Uberschall module. It's just the thing that the BE does, where it's a little bit smoother and a little bit more like polite, and they sound great, but it's, there's this kind of scuzz and like nasty thing that I think I chase sometimes.
Yeah.
Which the modules I like the Uber module, the 6505, they're my two favorite high gain ones. And the 2CP, which is a totally different thing. The 2CP sounds like my Mark IV. Very, like much more like kind of controlled, tight thing. They're definitely probably my three favorite high gain modules. And then like the 800 module sounds amazing. Like, so another segue, I pulled a bunch of Marshalls out the other day, because I've got Ryan's DSL 50 here.
Yep.
And, I've got two DSL 100s. And I wanted to see which, I remember one of the DSL 100s sounded a bit better than the other one.
Right.
And I just wanted to like mark which one it was so that I remember. And the one that I thought I remembered sounded the best was the one, I've got like a sticker on it somewhere. And, they sounded so similar, literally at the same settings. One sounded a bit thinner. So I was like, cool, that's the one I don't like. But I pulled out like the Marshall 2210, and then, yeah, it was okay, but then like just the Syn 800 module was like, that's the sound that I want when I think of an 800, 100%. Like,
yeah.
I've been using that module a lot for like pedal demos, because you can set it pretty clean and it's a decent enough clean sound. But like I did a video with the Hudson Broadcast, which is, like a Neve channel strip in a box.
Yeah, I haven't watched that yet. I'm really keen to check that out.
that into like the really clean 800 was a massive vibe. Like I really, really liked that. Not necessarily for, I guess, like I wouldn't track like a ragdoll song with it, but if you were just doing like rock and roll, that was such a cool thing. So yeah, you know, it's like I really, really like that module. The TDLX, I really, really like. There was a, you know, the Engel Powerball's really good. Pretty much everything's really good. And then I think some of the modules for me cross over into that, like the Uber module's great. That's one of my favorite high gain things in the universe. It just makes me happy.
It made me laugh. I was scrolling through Gumtree a couple of nights ago, and I was just like, oh, someone's listed a Synergy module for sale.
Who could that be?
Yeah. And then I saw what it was, and it was Ecstasy. Oh, who's selling an Ecstasy? Maybe I could get a second one. That's really funny. So,
oh yeah, guilty as charged. But yeah, that's like purely to enable. I think I want to try an SLO module still. So there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with all of us, isn't there? That's why we're all here.
Yeah. Could just quickly, your 2210. I've never really liked that in any context when we tried it.
Get this, man. I was playing and I was like, this is weird. I can hear this kind of like clean thing underneath like the sounds. I'm playing on the distorted channel on it. I'm like, I'm going to turn the volume on the clean channel all the way down. Oh, that sounds different. And you turn it up. There's like horrible channel bleed between it.
Oh, I see. Right.
Yeah. And I actually, at the Melbourne Guitar Show, I was chatting to Jason Tong, and I feel like he mentioned something about this. Like, yeah, you know, it's a very particular switching design. And then, yeah, you go online and read about it, and channel bleed is this thing with those amps. So, yeah, that was pretty funny. Turning the clean channel off so it didn't bleed into it, I still didn't love it. It kind of had a sound which was pretty recognizable. If I was going to do an Accept tribute band, I would use that amp and and that Dean V. Like that would be the sound, because it's kind of got that. I don't know. There's just like a very like early to mid 80s like hard rock. This kind of like it's nowhere near as nasty and bitey sounding as I expected 2203 to sound. It's quite smooth and like more behaved.
How do you find it compares to the 900?
Pretty well, because I've got a 900 Mark III. It was actually funny. I was watching. So there's the Guitar Hour podcast. So it's Tom Quayle, David Beebe, a few other guys, Jake Wilson, Dan. I always forget Dan's last name, but and they were talking about, because Marshall's just been bought by some non-British company, Sounds or something, and they were talking about that, and they kind of brought up the point that they're in, they're in the UK. They were like, yeah, you know, the nice thing about Marshalls and living in the UK is you can get a Silver Jubilee for like £1,000. Yeah, right. Which you can't anywhere. Like, you know, import duties and everything else. It's like, so you want to get like a loud amp that you can gig with. It's just there. And then they were talking about, you know, what was your first Marshall? And they talked about the AVTs and the valve states, and you know, it was really, really good. And then they were talking about like the Johnson Millenniums and the Digitechs, and
I remember those ones. Yeah,
I'll send you the episode. I think you'll really, really like it. But they sort of mentioned the early valve states, and Tom sort of says, is like, what you guys have to realize is that like if you play extreme metal, there's people who like worship these amps. They're really desirable, you know, like a lot of like the Swedish chainsaw sound revolves around HM2 into solid state Marshall. Chuck Schuldiner used the early valve states in Death. And they were like, no, surely you just mean like it's one of these things like, oh, isn't it funny that we're using this crap thing? He's like, no, like people legitimately love these amps. And then they mentioned the 900s, and it's like, yeah, people kind of crap all over the 900s. And should they? I feel like the 900 is just the default backline amp in the world.
Oh yeah, maybe. I mean, there was a lot of them, I suppose. Probably not that desirable. Anymore. So yeah, easy to come by.
Yeah, so I've got a Mark III, which isn't a very typical. I really dig the design on that, where it's a single channel with two master volumes. And
wait, so is that still, that's a high gain dual reverb still?
No reverb.
Okay. All right.
JCM 900 Mark III. It's a single channel amp with two master volumes.
Okay.
Very simple. It sounds pretty similar to the 2210 in my opinion. Like it's got but you have split gain controls like the dual reverb, like preamp and whatever the other one's called. But I did a video with that years ago, and this anonymous person left a bunch of comments saying, yeah, I was working at Marshall at the time. We kind of designed that, and, you know, take this with a pinch of salt, but it was sort of like, yeah, we initially started that amp designing it around like Michael Schenker's guitar sound, because Michael was using the 50 watt 800s and, you know, like just kind of spicing them up with like a cocked wah in front of them.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it was, and then it, like, you know, because you have to build an amp to scale and manufacture it, things got changed and it ended up sounding different and all that kind of thing. So I'll take that with a pinch of salt. I have no idea if this was an actual person or just someone, you know, reiterating things they'd read on the internet and claiming to be someone else. But that's believable.
Yeah. Look, they have a sound. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I don't know how identifiable it is to compare it to like a Soldano or a 5150 or whatever. But
to me, the JCM 900, it's like a punk rock amp. That's when I think of a JCM 900, I think of like Green Day for some reason. And like, I don't know if they use them, but
I feel like they did. Yeah. I think there's a couple of videos of them with the 900s, like, cause it just has that, it's like pretty nasty sounding.
Yeah.
We have one of those at TAFE actually. And I've credit to my students, like they recorded a kind of Deftones-ish sounding song with one of the other students. And that's the sort of the only high gain. There's that and a Laney GH100 as well, but I think the Laney sounds a bit funky to me. But yeah, the 900, like they pulled a really good tone with it, like surprisingly good tone.
Yeah.
So it can be done. I feel like the louder it is, the better it sounds personally. But yeah, I think that was a problem with mine. One of the reasons I didn't like it is I never was able to run it hot enough to give it that sort of character. And all Marshalls are sort of like that, or at least maybe not DSLs, but the pre-DSL ones. Like if you're trying to play in your bedroom and you don't want to wake mum and dad, then it's kind of sucks to use them.
Yeah.
This is pre having like decent sounding attenuators, or you know, them being affordable. Hey, do you remember going to Cash Converters in Osborne Park like 15 years ago? I remember they had like a Marshall Power Brake sitting there, and you were so excited to see one. This is like 2007.
Because I'd only read about them, and I remember who's not just Dan Hawkins from The Darkness, seeing photos of his rigs. You know, when they came out, and he was using plexis, but he had a bunch of power brakes so that he could actually run them at reasonable volumes. Oh man, that is a throw. That is and they were gigantic. Those
they're
things.
Big. Are they resistive loads as well? They're not like is it the crate thing? The hot plate?
Yeah, I see. I feel like with the power brake, because you're meant to run it into a cabinet, that it probably, you still get the impedance from the cab. That's the way a lot of those things work, where even if it's a resistive load, don't quote me on this. I know if I take the Fractal load box and I use the speaker through on it, the impedance changes to the impedance of the actual cabinet. And I've done that and like unplugged the cab and heard the character of the amp change. So maybe even if it's a resistive load, but you've got a cabinet connected, it's kind of fine.
Yep. Okay. Anyway, that just came to mind because, yeah.
Anyway, that was my reference for them. The Darkness used.
What was I going to say? Yeah.
With loud amps.
Oh yeah, one more. This third time, shout out. There was a Fright video that came out the other day that I watched with Variax. Maybe it's a few weeks old.
Oh yeah, wow.
Really, really interesting. Variax versus like, you know, taking an old Marshall and why you can use Variax in some amps and not others. And he also was like, and here's the amp stock, here's the amp with a Variac in it, here is the amp with a power station. And so like it's not just a advertisement for a power station, because there's a lot more to it than that, but it was really interesting. You should check it out. I think you'd like it.
Yeah, I'll have to do that.
I'm going to stop mentioning Fryette. Like, it's the third time in this podcast I've already like given him a shout out. So,
I mean, the goal is to just get Stephen Fryette on here, because you probably couldn't find anybody who actually knows something about amps that Steve doesn't. That's my impression. Not that he'd be like, yeah, I know everything. He just seems like a guy's like, yeah, I remember that thing in 1978 doing this, and that guy, you know, he's like, he's just like an overflowing fountain of cool amp stuff, you know?
Yeah, it'll happen. Anyway, should we segue not so subtly onto the next topic? I think we've given that enough air, haven't we?
I think we've absolutely thrashed that. And to everybody who's still tuning in, you know, we appreciate you. And to everybody who's followed the Instagram page and everything else, you know, feel free to message us suggestions for topics. But so we wanted to talk about the NAMM show because I spoke about it in my Q&A yesterday on my channel, and it was interesting. Obviously, it's coming up, but like a bunch of other convention stuff is coming up. And I mentioned in my video, I've just watched something about E3, and the kind of parallels between E3 and NAMM are quite pronounced on there. So I haven't been to the NAMM show though, and you have. So I wanted you to just like talk about what it was like and how you enjoyed it.
Oh, and yeah, it was fun, man. I mean, I think I've mentioned it before to you, or maybe I've even said it on the pod. Like it was fun. Glad I went and did it. Probably don't need to do it again in a hurry, if I'm being honest. Mostly because I'm not so outgoing as to go and make a bunch of friends and shake hands and kiss babies and whatnot, or what's the term?
Shake babies and kiss hands.
That's the one,
right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was it was cool, but there's not too much to say. Like,
it's a bit of a rite of passage. That's what it feels like for our generation, because we used to read about it so much.
That's the thing. It's like if you grew up so far away from that part of the world, like we did, and you're reading lots of guitar magazines, and it's just awesome. Like, it's good to tick that off the box, even though everyone that's there that's been going for more than probably like 2 NAMMs fucking hates it. Like, no one really wanted to be there, but they all kind of just, there was like, you know, there was so many fucking posers wandering around, man. Like dudes in makeup, like 80s rock makeup, which is just like, this is unnecessary. Like, who do you think you're here to impress? Like, there's no one's like, because your whole band rocks up in, I don't know, dressed, I can't, like something like Outcast from an Alice Cooper video or something like that. Doesn't mean, all of a sudden.
It is LA. It is in like, well, what is it? Anaheim. It's close enough to LA. It's you know, it's California.
I thought that part of it was really kind of funny.
Land.
Yeah. But, you know, it was cool, man. Like, cause I, obviously had some friends that knew people. So I got to stand in a circle with Phil X, and that was really just kind of funny to be like, why am I here? You know, but that's also that LA thing where I think, you know, you just kind of happen to know someone that knows someone. And then all of a sudden you know, I was with our friend Umi, and he's like, oh, hey, man, you got to come meet Reinhold Bogner. I was like, okay. So shook hands with Reinhold Bogner, who did not give 2 fucks about me. Like, but it was just, that just happened, you know? I saw Devin Townsend, actually. And I was like, hey, Devin, right. How you going? He's like, hey, man, how are you? And he walked off. And it's like, well, that's nice.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, being 2 little boys from Perth, the proximity to absolute excellence in your field is something that you kind of, I feel like some Americans maybe take for granted if you live in LA or New York. It's like, oh yeah, so-and-so and so-and-so, and we know this guy and they did this. But for us, it's still like, what? Huh?
Oh, mate,
really?
Kevin Parker from Tame Impala was at the Dockers game the other day, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, there you go. I mean, hey, to be fair, if you actually look at people the world cares about, you know, far more influential than any of the people we've talked about at any point on this show.
That's a shame. More people should care about George Lynch, but
I believe so as well. That is a universal truth.
But I always warm up that gig with Wicked Sensation. So there you go.
There you go, George.
So
the
anyway,
love you.
Yeah, that was my NAMM experience. But yeah, so I said I didn't actually watch your video, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit with you because firstly, there's a few things. One nice thing about NAMM is I'm looking forward to the couple of days when a bunch of new products are announced. That's a little bit like Christmas for me. So if nothing else, to know that there's like a time of year when it's like, oh boy, what's going to happen? What's coming out? That's exciting.
Like, I'll send you this video that I watched. So it's by a YouTube channel called Arlo, and Arlo does like Nintendo videos, but it's a man our age, but instead of showing his face, it's a blue puppet.
As you do.
So imagine it's got this like Sesame Street pop culture kind of crossover thing. And yeah, you know, they kind of, all the points they make about E3, where they're like, yeah, E3 to me was like, it was the one time in the year you looked forward to hearing about all the cool new stuff that you were going to get excited about over the next year. And that's NAMM, you know, it's like, I just remember, you know, grabbing Guitarist magazine or whatever it was, where they would have all the, you know, they'd be at the NAMM show and it would be the report and it'd be like 40 pages of all the stuff. And you would look at it and be like, oh, this is the new PRS thing and there's a new Gibson thing and Marshall have this and PV are doing this. So you kind of got all these like announcements, or it was just the couple of days in the year where all the new stuff got launched and announced, which obviously doesn't happen any now. We're living in this constant stream of, you know, every couple of weeks a new product drops and all the big YouTube channels have a video about it. You know, that's just how stuff works. It's not everything all at once. As Christmas, it's Christmas, you know, that's gone. It's now like, well, I can look forward to like a few cool beers after work every couple of weeks. Yeah.
So, I mean, with that being said, look, I think I haven't thought about this too much to make a very profound discussion. I'll just preface it with that. But we're in this really interesting transition period for the technology of music industry with all the AI stuff. And I mean, I'm really interested. It may not happen this year, but the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, stuff with plugins, stuff with software, how that's going to impact everything that we use in our musical aspirations. I feel like there's going to be some big stuff that happens, a couple of little tasters that might happen this year. We might see what direction things are going in. So it'll be something to keep an eye out for, is like, you know, whenever the NAMM time is, you know, and again, in terms of this like showcase thing, like however that happens, like it doesn't have to be in person. It can just be an online, a website. Here's what everything's been showing. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's exciting in that respect.
I think as well, the difference, and I didn't really talk about this in my video, but it's worth mentioning, is the difference is with E3. I think it was like this year, like Nintendo and like the proper big dogs have basically gone, nah, but they're sort of like, they have such a, I guess the equivalent for the music industry would be like Yamaha. If Yamaha went, no, we're not doing NAMM, that would be a really, really big thing. But, you know, Yamaha still do it, and Line 6 still, you know, as part of Yamaha, they still wait to announce all their new hardware things around then. So you still have like, maybe in the music industry, there's just more big players than there are in video games. So you can afford for Gibson not to come, and you can afford for certain other companies not to come to NAMM, and you still got plenty of other big ones that are launching stuff. And I guess the other thing as well is, if you think about, you know, for us primarily being guitar players excited about guitar gear, we're talking about like everything launching. This is a live sound, other instruments, you know, drums, keyboards, music production stuff, studio stuff, you know, everything, that entire, it's not just like, oh, NAMM is about like guitar stuff being announced. That's a small part of it. Whereas if you look at E3, it's about the video games. It's not so much about like
the hardware,
the graphics card. You know, they don't get launched at E3 or something like that. You might get a new console or something, but you know, it's different in that regard, I think is worth noting.
Sure.
Someone made a great thing as well, where they sort of mentioned, it's like, yeah, but it's a bunch of like-minded people all getting together at the same place. And I was like, yeah, there is something to be said about, you know, just loads of people converging on the same space for a couple of days. It's all a big party. Everybody kind of goes through the same experience. And someone made they said kind of like summer nats, which for guitar players guitar players in a showroom. If you go and play guitar in public, it's the equivalent of doing a burnout.
Yep, pretty much. But, you know, I was going to say, sorry to cut you off there. Man, these things, like, I remember not that long, a few months ago, listening to one of these Friedman podcasts where he talks about how much it costs to put up Like,
Massive
it was
dollars.
something like 60 grand for them to run a booth at NAMM for the size that they needed. Like,
and that's tiny as well, you know?
yeah, it was big, like it was relatively big, but yeah, all things considered, like fucking hell, 60 grand. That's a lot of amps that you got to sell to recoup that money, let alone the time of the people involved to go and like man it. Like your Yamahas and stuff, it's kind of, I guess it's all right. Like they probably have money just coming out of every hole to cover that. But you know, smaller brands, like yeah, it would be very 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 pricey. And yeah, when it's, as you say, like when Fractal has never done NAMM, is that correct?
Yeah, but why would they?
Yeah.
No, like they sell direct.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that I've seen a few people talk about that model of going through shops or going direct and all these sort of things, and how that's all transitioning out now as well. It's sort of the purpose of it being a trade show, like not for public but for other you know, sellers and stuff. Well, what's the fucking point if you just got to get a newsletter blast, you know, when a new product gets announced anyway? Like it doesn't really seem to matter too much, does it? But
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it depends on the scale of the business. If you're essentially, if you make, like, actually, I saw a pretty cool video during the week. It was in New Zealand. They had I think it's kind of like a museum exhibition about just kind of music. And there was a little feature on Paul Crowther Audio, the hotcake. And, you know, it's a couple of minutes long, and I'd never seen anything with Paul Crowther, and it's just him talking about, yeah, I was in Split Ends and I made this pedal and, you know, we used it. And then I was like, you know, teching for a band who was opening for the Violent Femmes, and the distortion pedal they were using sucked. So like the guitar player just walked out and put a hotcake in and they loved it. So lots of people like the hotcake, and pretty much everyone in New Zealand had one at one point. And, you know, like Paul's just making pedals in his house. Him and his wife just literally do everything on them. It's like a little cottage industry, you know? You don't need to go to a trade show to do that.
Yeah.
The beauty of the hotcake is that it's like a word of mouth thing. There's this scale where, you know, how much turnover do you need to be generating, and how much product do you need to be selling to justify going to a trade show? There'd be like a pretty, you know, there'd be if it's $60,000 for Friedman to do a booth, and if like, yeah, you got to be making what, like 5-6 times that to sort of be able to justify it minimum. Yeah,
I guess. I mean, I wonder what it costs to be at the Melbourne Guitar Show. We should find that out.
Yeah, actually, I could find that out. And I mean, like a good example there is Charles Cillier has a booth there, but it's like Jason had his amps with Charles, and you know, Charles has his own guitars and does Strandberg, and there was like a lot of stuff happening. But then you had Gibson and Boss and, you know, Line 6 and these kind of things where they each had their own kind of spaces. That as well was a lot of, I think the other underrated thing is the distributors as well. That's kind of what you get at a trade show in Australia. Not necessarily the brands where like, you know, an American-based brand or like, again, I'll use
independent
Yamaha
music and all the stuff that they putting.
Yeah. I'll use Yamaha as the example because Yamaha would have Yamaha America as well. You know, they're on a scale where they can justify having essentially a separate business under the same umbrella. So, yeah, the economics of it would be fascinating and, you know, terrifying when you're talking about, you know, it's costing more than an employee's entire yearly wage probably to run a booth.
Yep. With all that being said, what's some stuff that's coming out that you've been like kind of looking out for, or anything that you've got your eye on?
For this year's NAMM show, I'm always curious to see what the new Line 6 thing is. They always seem to come out with cool, you know, they seem to what was it last year, like the HX Stomp XL and the Pod Go before that, and you know, they'll probably have some new hardware.
The XXL,
just 32 buttons, 8 blocks.
The Pod Go Ultra, maybe.
Pod Go Turbo, Turbocharge XL. I'm obviously something like, you know, you can see like the Synergy, the 6505, like that was kind of their NAMM show-ish. It's interesting that like NAMM time is a proxy for announcing a big thing as well, even if you're not there. You just kind of announce your product around there and you you cash in on the hype. Yeah, mostly, probably it'll be interesting to see on the plugin front what a couple of companies do, as you were saying, because the AI machine learning thing's exploding at the moment. Actually, there was a really good video that I saw yesterday. So Leo Gibson, I don't know if you're familiar with Leo.
No. Is this a real person?
It's a real person. It's a great name. And I forget where Leo's based in Europe. I want to say Italy, but apologies to Leo if you're listening to this and I got it wrong. But yeah, like kind of, I don't even know what the equivalent would be. Like, I think Leo's one of the few people doing stuff with like proper data where it's like, hey, I did, basically what he did was he got a Kemper, a Quad Cortex, Tonex, and the Neural Amp Modeler. And the thing that I thought was really interesting about that is like, yeah, we'll do a null test and calculate the error signal.
Cool. Yep.
So reamped the same reamp thing through the same amp twice and got a non-zero null on it.
Right.
Yeah, so that's, hey, which to me immediately makes sense where it's like you're feeding AC into this thing as a starting point. So maybe phase is going to be a thing. And so there's this baseline variation in an amp with itself, which was the coolest thing in there. That to me was like, this is amazing that they've done this. So yeah, he kind of says,
it's amazing that's never come up until, I've never heard that until just then. That's really funny.
Yeah, like so simple as well. Does it null with itself? Well, not necessarily, but he's basically like, okay, cool, here's what the error signal is. And it's something that's crazy low, but it's not zero. So he uses that as like the theoretical limit that you can approach with accuracy, and then, you know, gets all these, and it's, the number's like negative 50 something, and I think the Kemper's like negative 30-ish, Quad Cortex is a little bit better, Tonex is around like the minus 40, and the Neural Amp model is a little closer. But then he's like, I'm going to train this Neural Amp modeler profile for like, you know, 24 hours or something, like 10,000 epochs or something, like crazy amount. And yeah, it gets better, but probably not something you'd be able to hear. So it's like, it's got the lowest error signal, but then he's like, yeah, it actually, the more you do on this, it actually hits a physical limit, which is not the same as the theoretical limit, which is interesting.
Oh, okay.
But then he's like, this is for the settings on one amp. If you had 5 knobs on the amp and you wanted to do all of them, then yeah, he comes up with this insanely large number where it's like, yeah, if you wanted to use this to capture the complete behavior of an amp, you know, it's too much time. This is why you might just want to have a hybrid approach. And brilliant video. Like Leo's really, really awesome and a very, very good guitar player as well. But yeah, actually seeing some data with it. So that was super interesting. And he makes it's probably the best video that I've seen about all this kind of, you know, AI assisted guitar profiling stuff to date. So that was, it'll be interesting to see that in, I still think that with the whole AI thing, the interesting thing isn't going to be capturing amps or anything. It's going to be the like isotope style, hey, I want to sound like Eddie Van Halen from, like, write me a patch in my Axe-Fx that sounds like Eruption. Right. Here's the reference signal. Put all the put all the blocks in for me, tweak them for me. I'll fit, like, that to me, I think will be the really fun thing when we get there with AI stuff, or mix my song for me to sound like Joe Barresi.
Yeah, I mean, that's already getting there. But I don't know. I'm sort of like, I'm not that positive about the future of my specific industry in so many ways. So yeah, maybe I won't speak too much. Okay, so to answer my own question, what am I excited about coming out at NAMM? Because I can tie this around to that. I'm really curious because I think SoundFlow has a new update coming out, which they tease that.
Interesting.
They've been really quiet for like months and months. They usually have an update like the start of every year. And
yeah, it's like, who's been quiet, and that's who you know has got something.
Yeah. So, okay, here's the thing with SoundFlow, right? Is I mentioned this before. I've got a button on my Stream Deck where if I press it, it sends whatever tracks I have highlighted to a specified like folder, like Pro Tools folder, track folder, routing folder. Routing folder, that's what I'm looking for.
Yep.
Color codes everything. I've got that set up for every style of track, if it's drums and bass and guitars and whatever, for a session. Like
so you create your
session.
own like macros for a session.
Exactly. So to give you an example, I did that on an album about maybe 9 months ago-ish, and it saved me probably 6 hours of work. So
That's amazing.
It's not AI, but it's still like a time-saving software feature. Let's just call it that, right? Now with what happened with Avid a couple of months ago, I think it was, like one of the previous updates, they opened up the system develop. I think it's called the system developers software, or that side of the Pro Tools software, which had previously been very tight and confined, and unless you were like a specified developer, you couldn't do shit. And it's been, so just generally opened up a lot more. So one of the big problems with like, say, SoundFlow or other things trying to create macros is like they don't have access to certain elements of the software to really be that efficient working on it. You're sort of still working on top of the software like someone physically clicking buttons and
Gotcha.
stuff. So I'm really curious with the new SoundFlow how they can integrate their product and their software more into Pro Tools, because that's going to be really interesting. Because what it will mean for me is that it will hypothetically save me a lot more time when it comes to working. Hypothetically, I don't know what these things could be in physical terms or practical terms, I mean. So that's really interesting. But to get back to the fact that I saved myself 6 hours of time to, do all this routing, in theory, I could have probably paid a student of mine a certain amount of money to come and do all that work for me.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll do it in 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, whatever. But that's someone that hypothetically is like lost out on a bit of work. Like all that grunt work is just disappearing.
Yeah.
And all that, possibly that's something that a student of mine or someone else, they could benefit from having like this introduction of how a session gets put together or this, that, and the other. Like, because I certainly did that stuff when I was coming up like a long time ago. So it's funny because like the point at which you get to like being able to really work in that industry, like to mix a song and edit a song and doing routing, all that sort of stuff, and then someone that's literally just starting out, like the middle ground is completely disappearing. So it's kind of interesting. Like I'm really excited for it on the one hand because it's going to save me a shitload of time and energy. Kind of disappointed on the other hand to know that the education for younger people is going to change. And I don't have a specific thing I can correlate it with. But
just like, think about how like, when ChatGPT was breaking, it coincided with the start of the school year here and the absolute hoo-ha that erupted with like, will schools allow ChatGPT, and like all the stuff that universities have had to do, to like detect when it's like there was this kind of almost moral panic around it. And now it's just, oh yeah, ChatGPT, I wanted to do something, and and then now there's GPT-4, which you sort of pay for. There's like the way these things can kind of get normalized really, really quickly. It's like, the speed of disruption grows, but also the speed of like, oh, well, okay, cool, we'll work around this. I think the traditional pathways will be disrupted, but there'll probably be a kind of a similar thing to like music streaming, where it's like when Spotify and stuff first really came out, we were still printing CDs and selling them, but it's taken like a few years for the big dent in sales to really happen, where it's like, we don't sell nearly as many CDs online. We still sell them at shows though. That's still happening, but we sell way more downloads. So
that's good. I can't think of the last project I did that got done to CD. I mean, it's actually no, I can, but it's a different sort of project. So it disappears. I mean, like, talking about the stuff, the AI and all this sort of stuff, it's a shame. Like there's an entire middle ground that's going to disappear, and there's going to be something that entire area of my industry and other industries will, like the knowledge will be lost over time because it all will be done by computers, which could be partly like a non-issue. Maybe it doesn't really matter. it might be good for me because I still do understand it, that I can benefit off that as a teacher, or as I have certain skills that will be required for a little while longer. But, you know, it's a little bit, it's intimidating. I'm not like, you know, it's not keeping me up at night thinking about this stuff, but it's certainly the way the industry is changing is coming very, very quickly. I mean, you talk about the guitar sounds, like all the stuff that I'm doing with amps and mics and shit. Who gives a shit? Like, as you say, if you can just write a patch in your Axe Effects to give you that sound, like, why does it actually matter? I mean, it matters to me mostly out of general interest, perhaps more than like practical use even. So I guess you separate it then. Like, is that a hobby thing for me and it's not so much a work thing for me? It could be thought of like that.
I mean, the other thing that I find pretty interesting as well is, you know, I've had multiple people write to me and say, hey, Leon, I used your free IR for an entire album that my band made and it really worked well. And I liked it and I used it in my Fractal or Helix or Quad Cortex as the main sound I do live. That's just like solved a problem for me. And, you know, that's something that I like, I consciously wanted to make available to people. So is it that it's good, or is it that it's free? Or is it that it's like, you know, the fact that it's like a 70% on the good scale and a 100% on the free scale maybe outweigh the fact that you could get something that's like 100%, but you got to pay $3 for.
Yeah, but I mean, geez, like, you know, there's so many of those things. It doesn't, like, who cares almost? Like
you know, Justin York's still selling IRs, even though, like, clearly I've got an IR that is free that works in a commercial setting.
Yeah.
That has actually been, one fun fact I learnt was that it's actually on, you know, the like Taylor Swift re-recording her back catalog. Some of the sounds on there, like, use some of my cabs.
That's very, very funny.
Isn't that hilarious?
Mate, you're a part of history.
Literally, the current most successful commercial artist. There's aspects of it which I guess you could say are open source. You know, you get Leon's free IR, cool. That's really, really cool. Do I feel like I've missed out on something by making it available? No, because I use it.
Yeah,
you know, it's like I fixed the problem for me. Having it available for people to check out, cool. That's awesome. I don't know. I just feel like I'm kind of paying it forward because I have benefited immensely from this technology.
Yeah,
look, in my own life.
I'm not saying that's a bad thing whatsoever. Like that,
no,
I think that's completely fair. I think it's just look, I don't even know what I think anymore. I'll be honest. I think I probably need another coffee soon. That's probably where I'm at. And
and that's probably the best segue to say it is time to wrap this up.
Man, I tell you what, I've been thinking about this pod for like a week. I just wanted to, I really missed doing it last week because it's really fun to talk about nerd shit and reminisce as well for an hour and a half.
Exactly.
So,
and I've had quite a few people write to me and say they've been enjoying this while they do their gardening or washing the dishes and things like that. It's exactly how I enjoy podcasts. So that means a lot. It means a lot to me to hear that.
Yeah. I was listening to Behind the Bastards about the Liver King as I was doing that speaker in that cabinet before. So, you know.
I should check that one out.
Yeah, there's some good ones. He said he's got one lined up on Vince McMahon, or he started to research it.
Oh, really?
That's going to be...
Wow.
That's going to be interesting. But, yeah, well, as I said, it's been always a pleasure to talk to you, Uncle Leon.
Likewise, man.
And we'll be back next week with probably no interruptions in the near future. I don't think I'm going away anytime soon, so we can make it all happen. And hey, check us out on Instagram.
Just do that. Instagram.
Easy
Have a
place.
nice time with your life. Play some guitar. Make some noise. Tell us about it. Message us, and we'll include it on the show.
And you know what, Leon? Next episode, not this one. Next episode, putting a theme song at the start.
Okay, it's happening.
Yep, it's happening. It probably will be the one that we've already discussed. But It's actually going to appear instead of just straight into pod.
Straight into pod. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Peace.